Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights to help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have another guest with us here. Her name is Carrie. She's a licensed clinical social worker living in Colorado with her Great Dane, Gavin. She is a childless, not by choice person and is co founder of Saunders Sisterhood, a community dedicated to supporting individuals who are single and childless, not by choice. And so I'm excited to have Carrie on the show today because she's sharing a perspective of this journey of trying to be a parent that is often not talked about and is not given a lot of space. And so I'm very excited to have this episode with Carrie to raise awareness of this side of the story that most of us don't hear. So without further ado, Carrie, I want to welcome you onto the podcast.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me, and thanks for allowing me to talk about this topic today. I appreciate it.
Definitely. And I have to ask before we get started, how's Gavin doing?
He's good. He's my Great Dane, and he's sleeping behind me in the little patch of sun. So I'm hoping he stays quiet throughout this whole thing.
Well, I if he ever wants to chirp in, I'm very happy to have him be a guest on here as well. So,
Okay.
um, well, I just want to say I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you because have raising a family and having a child is something that society has set up these parameters for us to accomplish that in, and it's always this
Yeah.
mindset of go to school, get married, have a kid, have a family, get a career going. We've kind of been told how to do this journey, and for a lot of us, including myself, that journey didn't really work out the way that society told us it was going to be. And
Right.
so I do know that there's a lot of grief in many areas of that. And some people are not able to have children at all just because of how their body works. People like me have lost a child to stillbirth. And then there's people like you that have walked the other side of this, was where we're childless without a choice. We didn't choose this, but this is the path we were given. And so I'm just really looking forward to giving you some space here to share with us your story to get started in the podcast.
Yeah. I will just dive right in then. So I never ever imagined that I would be someone talking about being childless, not by choice. For me, I'm childless by circumstance, which, in the business world, they talk kind of a lot about sentinel events are like the Swiss cheese just aligning in that perfect way. And for me, the Swiss cheese definitely did align. I think that there's a misconception, though, that there has to be a million different things that happen in order for someone not to have kids. And in reality, it it's actually probably harder to have a child than not. But in our society, we're kind of fed the opposite to be true. But so I grew up kind of always assuming I would have a child. It was interesting on my YouTube channel. Somebody asked me this week in the comments, did you always want kids? Or, or, when did you start wanting kids or things like that? And I was like, I don't know that I ever intentionally sat and like thought it out and made a choice and have this intentional thought process around it. I just kind of grew up believing and thinking and expecting that I was going to have children. I was going to get married, have children, because that's just what adults do. And I didn't see people not doing that, quite frankly. I think sometimes people have kids under different circumstances or things like that. But I certainly didn't think that if I wanted kids, I may not have them. And, I say that or preface it to say that there's not really any kind of preparation, right? To talk about backup plans if this doesn't happen, thinking about your adult life as being multifaceted. It's kind of like you'll be a mom and then you may work, you may be a wife, you may do these other things. So that is the framework that I kind of always had. And then I ended up I got married young, or what was young to me. I was, how old was I? I was 24 years old and thought, okay, like I had graduated college, got married. I'm thinking I'm on this conveyor belt, right? Like I'm on the path to happiness. And then I got very blindsided. My perception is I was very, very blindsided and ended up divorced by the time I think I was 27. And then that hit like a ton of bricks. And that was probably one of the first things in my life that didn't go as planned, was off script, was outside my control. And it took a while to rebound from that, if I'm being completely honest. It was complete devastation. And thankfully, though, I had a really good support system. I had a lot of things to help me through that, but definitely trepidatious, right? Going into another relationship, particularly around marriage. Um, all of that to say, I was then kind of in my mid 30s and was like, "Oh, this is." The big panic for me was like, "What if I don't have kids? What if I don't have kids? I gotta figure this out." But I absolutely knew, because I went through this divorce, that I certainly didn't want to do that with a child. I think you can do it. I think lots of people do it. Um, but there was definitely a wound there and a lot of trauma responses. So then this sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy starts coming. You're like pre-grieving something that hasn't even happened yet. And I don't know if like there was a part of me like self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't know. All I know is that I did the very best I could in the moment. Um, but it didn't happen. I will say I did not end up finding somebody that I thought I wanted to have kids with. And the anxiety and panic around that almost then becomes a barrier in and of itself. And I had a hard time sort of teasing out of that. Like it's hard to show up in a relationship when you're like really worried about this thing that might not happen. And I ended up freezing my eggs, which is kind of a newer thing, because I was like, I want to extend this. I did that around 38 or yeah, I think maybe I was 39. It was 38 or 39. I ended up doing that because again, I was absolutely trying to preserve. I'm starting to panic. I'm starting to quite frankly, I'm starting to really panic. I'm starting the what ifs are happening. Um, and it was scary. I mean, it was scary for a lot of reasons. Not only for like this loss, but also there's no we'll get into this maybe more too, but I had no like blueprint or North Star for this other path. The other path was what the message that was sent to me was bitterness and loneliness
Mm.
and sadness and isolation. So that's a hard path to feel like you're getting pushed down a little bit. Um, freezing my eggs, all of that went well. They're still on ice somewhere, wherever they keep them. I pay for them each month, but um, and then I hit 40 and, then the grief, like really just the grief tsunami came because there was something about 40 that was sort of like, well, that's it. Guess this isn't happening. Um, when we think about like the stages of grief, I definitely can relate to going through those. Another aspect of grief that they talk about in the childless, not by choice community is disenfranchised grief, which I'm a therapist.
Mm.
I'd never heard of that before. And it's like a grief that's not recognized by kind of the people outside of you. And there's lots of different griefs that would fall into that category. Childlessness is not the only one, but it does fit real nicely into that category. And then to close, yeah, I fell off a cliff, I would say, like metaphorically. Definitely went into a grief spiral. was seeing a therapist, psychiatrist, those types of things. It was very helpful. I then started to find community, which is very common in terms of things that are helpful, right? In the grief community and other types of difficult things that can make you feel othered or isolated for other people's experience. And then I had some abnormal cells and ended up having to have a hysterectomy that was unplanned. But then I sort of got this sort of secondary grief of a wave of grief again, because now there's a period at the end of the sentence. Now it's absolutely not going to happen. So all of that to say, it's a long and windy road. And it you kind of move into lots of different feelings. One minute you're feeling okay, the next minute you're not. Um, you move in toward acceptance. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Stop. You move. Oh, I'm so sorry. You move toward acceptance, and then something else hits you.
That's fine. I can just edit that out,
Okay, I'm so
buddy.
sorry.
Gavin, buddy.
I'm so sorry.
He's got something to say.
I know he hears something. So that is my grief story.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your grief story with me and on this show for that reason, because as we've seen with your story, this didn't all go the way that society tells us it plays
Right.
out or supposed to play out. It took a very windy, off-beat, that's called off-roading, like your mountain driving on this hillside. You're just going on this different path you never saw coming. And I think that's
Yes.
the hard part about raising a family or bringing children into the world, is that it's not a linear path like a lot of people think. There are roadblocks that come up and unforeseen circumstances, and I can only imagine what that was like to have to have a hysterectomy of all things, because that really removes that ability to even have a child at that point. And so, I thought you brought up an interesting topic that I don't know much about, and I'm glad you brought it
Yeah.
up, is the disenfranchised grief. I haven't really heard that term much. And where did you
Right.
hear it from?
Yeah, good question. So, in like the real thick of the grief, right? Like you're not sleeping as well, all the noise is and chatter is just clouding your brain. And I kind of talk about like that 1 a.m. Google search where I'm like, single lady with no kids, depressed, and trying to just find something that speaks to me. And there's two concepts that I found when I did that. One was the fact that childless, not by choice, was even like a phrase, and there was communities around it. And the other was disenfranchised grief. And so I read about that because that really resonated with me. I also think it speaks to, for me personally, one of the hardest parts about this particular type of grief. Um, and one grief isn't worse than the other or better than the other or anything like that. I'm just speaking related to this piece of grief. Was I was going through something that nobody really knew I was going through. Because I didn't have words for it. Other people don't really have words for it. I think even in traditional griefs, people really don't know what to say. And when there's no sort of outward sign other than maybe someone's isolating or getting depressed or things like that, people don't really know what to do. Um, and so or they don't recognize it as a grief because there's not a tangible loss. We think about grief and loss, and the loss is really something that didn't happen versus something that did happen, which for some people, it doesn't register, particularly if you're on the outside and you've never heard of various types of grief either. Like I'm in the therapy world and didn't sort of conceptualize grief um, in this type of way.
Yeah, and I
So
think
that's where I heard it.
Well, I think that's very common that people don't know what to say going through
Right.
grief. And it's especially when you bring up something like this, like you and I are talking about, not being able to have kids, not by choice, but just the way life played out. And a lot of people I know go down these roads of like, well, couldn't you have done this? Or how come you didn't
Yeah.
do that? Or can't you see this thing happening? And they go down this thing of like trying to fix things versus like
Yes.
listening and trying to understand. And I think that's where we all get into trouble when we run into somebody going through grief. Because I have my own grief journey. I've heard that too. Like, oh, you'll have another child. And I'm like, that doesn't replace the one I lost. Thank you for
Right.
saying that. So people say things very inappropriately in that moment where I wish a lot of times it was a different conversation of, I'm really sorry to hear that. Tell me about your story or, how did that play out for you? And giving that person who's going through a situation like yours the chance to really share their story and just listen to them because
Hmm.
we all don't have the same journey for a myriad of reasons in life, and that's where I think there's so much for us to learn instead of judge or learn instead of make assumptions.
Yeah, I also think it's important for us to like bring grief into the conversation of things because not only for the people who want to support people they love and care about going through something, I do think, I'll speak for me and my experience. Before I sort of had some of these labels and things to call it, and I'm generally not like a real label person, but it's been helpful here, is I just thought something was wrong with me, right? Like I'm going to be depressed forever, or I'm going to feel this way forever because it felt like this was more of like this is just how it's going to be versus no, you're actually experiencing something very, very difficult that this is really normal to be feeling and experiencing what you are. And the really beneficial piece around it is sometimes then you can seek out community who have shared lived experience. And sometimes you're open to hearing some things that worked for them because they've gone through a similar path. So it kind of opens up more of a world of support. And for me, and kind of why I entered this space as well, in the work that I do, is being able to see other people who are further along on the journey and who are doing okay, who have figured out some ways to coexist with grief and coexist with this thing has been really valuable because when you can't see that, you start making up your own version of what it will be, and sometimes that version sucks.
So what was it like for you when you got into this community of people that chose not to have children and it wasn't by choice? What was it like getting into that community at first? Because I'm sure there were people further along, like you said, on that journey from where you were at. Was it a welcoming environment to jump into? Were there a lot of people that gave you suggestions and support and space to be heard? What was that like when you first got into that community?
Yeah, good question. Well, for me, I dipped my toe in. So I kind of just observed and hearing other people put words to what I was feeling, I found really, really helpful. Um, Finding people who were traveling, or I mean, and that's always the cliche one that comes up, but like people who were doing some fun things kind of got me to think, oh, okay, like there's other things I can do. There's travel groups even. Sometimes when you're single and childless, not by choice, you're like, well, I guess I'm gonna go do this thing alone. But then you're like, oh, there's lots of other people who they're going to Cuba this month or Ecuador this month. And just even though I didn't actually participate in those things, knowing those things were out there, I found really valuable. Quite frankly, even just seeing some people with a smile on their face was helpful too. It just kind of was like, oh, I might be able to get there. And these are people who also shared the difficult pieces of their story where they were in the depths of it too. And again, what are we like? Just having someone validate the experience and feeling seen was important. But it didn't. The reason I'm saying this is I want to emphasize it doesn't take a ton of like you don't have to like you can you don't have to take a ton of risk like if you're shy, right? Or you're anxious about like being in a group with people you don't know or things like that. Even just dipping your toe in and watching or observing, you can get value from that.
Yeah, and I think that's
And
the
then you
big
can
part.
control how much you do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the big part that people should realize when you go to support groups and things like that. You don't have to fully participate in every single
No.
thing that goes on, but I think what your approach is really a good side of it to just dip your toe in that a little bit and just really, I like to use it in the coaching realm of observe, just really
Yeah.
trying to see what people are doing, see how people react to things, see what people invite you to. Really just kind of learn what that environment is and try to make sure that it's a good fit for you because there are groups that you'll find along your journey. I've found them on my own journey as a lost parent that they're just not good groups to be in for whatever reason. They
Hmm.
just don't fit. But you'll find a group, by the way, that fit feels very easy for you and will come naturally.
Yeah. And one of the things that I like about the childless not by choice community is it's very global. So
Mhm.
like you're like I'm in sometimes groups with someone who's in South America, someone who's in Asia, me. And sometimes the hardest part is like finding the time zone stuff to coordinate. But it's like this this is a global thing for people who it's a global thing when I'm sure there's communities out there that maybe put less emphasis maybe on parenthood or children. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I wouldn't presume to assume that I know about every single culture. But there are a lot of cultures um, that do
What-
think about womanhood and motherhood or like fatherhood and provider or like man adulthood and provider things like that like providing for a family and when you're falling outside of that no matter where you are in the world it's nice to have some connection with other people who are experiencing that so
What
you'll meet a lot of cool people I guess is what I'm trying to say and people who have different perspectives.
what's it been like in this community to talk to people that are maybe from a different country, a different culture, a different background? What's that been like for you in that group?
Yeah, I mean, it's the old cliche, right? Like the commonalities are just way bigger than the things that aren't. Again, the hardest part is the time zone stuff. I'm also amazed at how many people know English well enough to engage in this type of way. But it's been like a secondary gain of being able to meet people and interact with people. And there's people within the community that'll like meet up. And, obviously you want to be very careful about meeting up with people you meet on the internet and things like that. But, like a woman I know that is part of Sandra's sisterhood. She's one of the co-founders with me. She's a teacher and she's in South Korea right now teaching and then like meets up with people in London that, you know, she's met and things like that. And it just it shrinks the world a little bit.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because across the world, I've been coaching people across the
Yeah.
planet in the last 6 months, and sometimes our cultures and our backgrounds can be so different from like the
Yes,
United States to Africa, for example, or England, or Greenland, or Canada, or Australia, and we not just that we have different accents or different ways that we talk, but our belief systems and our ideologies can be just a little bit different.
for sure.
And I just find that amazing, by the way, that you pointed out that there's a lot more in common than there are differences. And that's something that I certainly have found in the lost community of parents I'm part of, is that it are for some reason we're in different cultures and different backgrounds, but that commonality ties us in a way where those things don't really matter anymore.
Yeah.
Just kind of the way you said, you're not a fan of labels. I'm not a fan of them either. But it's just interesting how we can be so far apart yet have such a similar experience that brings us closer together.
Yeah, which is, a lot of the data shows like shared experience, feeling seen, like that's ultimately the secret sauce, right? For lack of a better word, in terms of healing. And, recognizing there's no period at the end of healing. Like you don't ever stop healing. Like this is now a part of the thing that you're integrating into your life and you're coexisting with.
Well, I think that's something that's a real challenge for a lot of people, and I'm breaking through
Mhm.
that stigma on my podcast is sharing with people that grief is not something you just get over and move on from, and life happens. It's really not something that works that way, and I think that's a very outdated ideology we've kind of built into people. Situations like yours, for example, and many women I've talked to that reach that 40 marker have brought up to me that it's built in with themselves that I'm supposed to be here, I'm supposed to be doing this, but life
Yeah,
took me the other direction. And so you're never going to just say, okay, well, that's just the way life was, and walk on. I've not met a person who's capable of doing that. I've always met people that always reflect back and say, I wish this could have been different. I wish the circumstances had changed and not been the way they were. And it doesn't mean that you're always in a very deep, dark, depressed thing like society
right.
thinks, but it just means that you're always acknowledging that situation. You're always reflecting back on it. It's always going to be a part of you. It's not going to leave. And so I think the ideology around grief and even disenfranchised grief that you brought up is just that, women I've caught on in particular walk around with so much of that pressure of holding those things in. I've had guests on my podcast who just cannot get pregnant. It doesn't matter what they've done, they just cannot get there.
Yeah,
But they can't go out there and actually talk about it because people do
right.
that fixing thing of, well, can't you do this or could you try that or could we go this way or that way or there's got to be something to here to do or don't stress about it. They always get brushed off in like a fix mode, and so it forces people like that to go within all the time and hold that all in. And that's such a heavy burden and a heavy weight to share, and that's why I like that you found a groups just like I have where there's that commonality of support and not that fixing judgment thing, but safe space to be held and be seen and heard and understood. Because I think that's what can really help us move through grief, not fix it or try to get over it, but give us space to understand it and process it so that we can try to figure out what that new path forward looks like for us.
Yeah, I think like our culture has a problem with grief on both sides of it. Like experiencing grief, but then talking about grief, not only as someone who's experiencing grief, but then how to support somebody through it. Fixing, problem solving, um, that's discomfort. That's like, somebody hearing the answer to a question that they weren't expecting. And then you just start blurting stuff out. I sometimes there's literally no suggestion somebody's going to give me that I haven't thought about compulsively ad nauseum all the time. Right. And I also, now that I'm further along, I can recognize that, you know, they just don't know what to say. Right. And it's like an attempt to be helpful. But I think we could do better at teaching people skills on how to validate. The other point that in terms of healing is something you're moving through versus ending, there are people, I think, particularly around different types of grief that are like, you're not over that by now, or you really got to move on, or you just got to move forward. And that is true to an extent. But pushing somebody there versus validating is probably you're gonna get the opposite result. Like if you validate somebody, then someone feels like they maybe can, okay, people still know I'm going through this, but I can still kind of try and take that tiny step forward. And also recognize milestones happen, anniversaries happen. Like you're stepping over grief for the kind of rest of your life. not in a way that'll be debilitating necessarily. I'm not saying you can't live your life, but in the childless not by choice community, they kind of talk about when friends start becoming grandparents. That's this like secondary or tertiary wave of grief that comes through. Holidays, like there's things that just occur that don't all of a sudden not create a twinge sometimes. Like it's not oh, I'm over that now. So now none of these future things are going to bother me. Well, no, but it's, it ebbs and flows.
That's a great way to talk about grief is the ebb and flow of things because that's what I personally have experienced that after losing my kid. I
Sure.
personally get I always share this since you brought it up. I bring it up for a reason. When you go to the store after Thanksgiving, all of a sudden the Christmas music's on and you see a bunch of kids
Yes.
running around the store. That is so triggering for me every year, and I can never figure out why, but it's every time, and I just have to leave the store because I can't handle it. And I still to this day can't. It's 3 years later. Some people say
Hmm.
like, well, you got to get past that and get over it. Well, it's not going to happen for me, unfortunately. And that's
Yeah.
where, just like you brought up, when you start seeing friends being grandparents, it's like it comes into this place sometimes of like, there's another opportunity in life I missed, or oh, I wish that would have happened. And
Right.
that's what I think a lot of people don't understand about people on our side of the fence with loss is that we have to live in that perspective. You might not have to if you have kids or have grandkids, you're not going to have that perspective of life. But when you're in a place like you and I are in a situation where becoming a parent in many ways is just off the table and it's just not going to happen for whatever reason. We have to live with that every day.
Hmm.
And that's where, it takes a lot more than, letting go and moving on. It takes a lot more to just say, give myself space to acknowledge things and give my space to say that I have a right to feel the way I do. I have a right to be sad or upset or frustrated or angry that this isn't part of my life and I really wanted it. It means a lot to hold space for people in that aspect because then we don't have to feel this pressure like we're somehow an outside bubble of society or there's something weird or wrong with us and we don't fit in. It's not any of those things. It's that life played out differently. And I think it comes back to what I wish our society would see with grief is that we all have different walks of life. No two of us are
Sure.
the same, and no two of us share the same experience, by the way. We just don't. Um,
Hmm.
there can be people in your community that are childless not by choice, and it's so many different facets of life. And
Yes.
to go down that road of, I guess where I'm fumbling around is like comparing those things is what gets people in trouble in the grief world. So.
Yeah. And it's not just like the person that's not there. Or it's again, so many of us grew up with this sort of like conveyor belt, right? Like this is what I'm going to do. These are the things we're looking forward to. So it's the stuff that isn't going to happen, as well as the person that's not there, or the grief and trauma around the loss. It's also like it my kid isn't going to be opening presents under the tree, or we're not going to Disneyland with the kids, or these, like, it's all of the ways in which people talk about the things they're looking forward to that isn't going to happen. And then there's not the replacement. There's not the, and this is what it can look like in a way that looks and feels good. Instead, it's, and you're going to have 20 cats in your house by yourself, alone and bitter and things like that. And so that's part of kind of where I try, and why I want to talk about this is it can be hard, but it can also be fulfilling and meaningful and fun. And you can have a life that is that way, but it's going to coexist with some harder stuff. And guess what? Everybody has something that they're coexisting with. And so it doesn't make you defective. It doesn't mean you can't have a life that you ultimately enjoy, but it means that you're going to have some empathy for a certain group of people or all people, it means that you're going to have a different perspective, but thankfully, that's good news. But it's gonna
I,
suck. I mean, and it's gonna suck at times, and there's no time frame. Like, if you have a time frame for yourself, get rid of it because it's just not fair to yourself.
well, I think the people that put time frames on grief, I kind of laugh a lot of the times inside because grief will come at you in the most unexpected moments in the most unexpected ways. And there are people that say they get over things or they moved on. I don't buy it because there's going to be something out there that triggers you and it's going to happen. And I think
Mhm.
that when you set that expectation for yourself that I'm somehow over this and then you get triggered, it's almost a reflection that no, you're not. And you almost set yourself up for failure in a lot of ways by setting an expectation that's unrealistic and one that's not even aligned with yourself. And so I love your idea and concept of coexisting with your grief. I think that's a beautiful way to say that because that perspective, by the way, not only holds space for you to grieve, it holds space for you to feel the way you need to feel, but at the same time, it leaves that door open for
Mhm.
positive things to happen in your life or be open to experiences that can be fulfilling and fun or happy at the same time. And
Mhm.
I think that's a hard concept in grief that you can have those two ends of the spectrum coexist at the same time. And it's something that, again, society does not wire us or teach us or tell us or
Right.
show us how to do that. But there's people like you and I that go out there and say, we're going to buck the stereotype real quick and show you that, yes, you can do this. And that's where I think a lot of people feel a lot of pressure come off themselves. They feel a little more empathetic towards their experience and they give themselves an opportunity to start again
Yeah. Or keep going.
or keep going.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, Carrie, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Sonder Sisterhood, your community
Sure.
that you have. How did you start that?
Yeah, so it started with me and two other women who are also childless, not by choice, and single, and kind of recognizing that that's like a subgroup within a group is essentially not being childless due to infertility. And it has its own wrinkles, like each sort of variant, I guess, for lack of a better word, has its own little wrinkles around it. And recognizing that we wanted to sort of create a space where people with a similar shared experience could drop by, could know they're not alone. I also my training is a social worker, and so I have this skill set kind of in therapy and things like that. And I thought, um, this isn't something that's even talked about in that space. And I think it's important because I absolutely believe in shared experience. I've seen that work for other people, not other people, but other examples of, we think about it in grief and loss. We think about it in addiction. We think about it in chronic illness. We think about it in like all these other ways. And um, it was also around the pandemic time where it was really difficult to get out there, and it seemed like the right time. And I was ready. Like
Mhm.
I had gotten enough space, had done enough work, um, was feeling in a place where I was ready.
Well, that's really beautiful that you created that community of things there.
Yeah.
How's your community been since you started it? And has it grown quite a bit? Is it global, by the way, or is it in the US?
Yeah, well, it's more virtual in terms of when we get together. Like twice a year, we usually run like 6 to 8 week groups, not therapy groups, but groups. And generally, we've done them around the holidays, just because that's a very difficult time, often. And then I also have a YouTube channel where I put out some educational content. I put out some like tips content. I also, and I can't believe I do this, but I also put out content where I'm just living my life. And it's not necessarily this like, oh, this is so hard or oh, this is so great. It's just if you are a regular person who's just dilly daddling through your day and trying to find fun things to do, uh, you know, it's what I'm doing. And then also trying to create more virtual spaces where we're getting together, even if it's not necessarily to talk about the childlessness per se, but it's maybe we are doing a book club like this year. I'm really trying to get my sister to come on and do a knitting project over the winter. She's a little camera shy, but essentially a space where sometimes the weekends are really boring. So, hey, you got a date with it's under sisterhood.
I love that.
So,
And
kind of a like trying to hit all the slices of one's life, right? The hard parts, the good parts, and really just the boring medium parts.
I love that you have that perspective because that's the story of life and the trajectory that we
Yeah.
live on. There's always going to be good, there's going to be bad, there's going to be parts that are, like you said, just boring. They're the parts that we just
Hmm.
kind of cruise along with. Um,
Yep.
I was going to ask you too, what's been your biggest takeaway so far on this journey that you've been? Because it really sounds like what has been a grief struggle for most of your life has turned into something where you're building a community and connecting with a lot of people going through similar experiences. And it sounds like, despite of this grief journey, there's been a beautiful gift here at the end to help other women going through the same thing.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Yeah, I definitely think like community and sort of being able to acknowledge what I'm going through has been really helpful. But uh, one of the other things that has been that I actually, it's hard for me to just say one, but so I'm going to say two more.
Hmm.
One is the idea I try and remind myself that feelings are not facts. Like this is sort of a thing that's talked about in the therapy world or not. But like I'm influenced and I have been influenced by a lot of things related to like this overlap between motherhood and womanhood that isn't actually there. But and then when you're not one of, when you're not when you don't become a mother, then it's like, oh, well, now what? And all the things that society tells you is what gets filled in that spot, but they're not true. And so getting practice and being able to do that has helped me do that in other facets of my life too. And then the other thing is I have this opportunity, and listen, this has taken me like 10 years to get to this point. So if someone's listening to this and is like, I'll never get there, you may not. And if like leave a little window of a door open to the fact that you might, is I actually have this opportunity now to intentionally think about what I want my life to look like and intentionally think about what do I like to do? Where do I want to be? How do I want to spend my time? It doesn't mean that I still don't grieve and miss what could have been or what I thought was going to be. And this is like sort of where I'm at in my world now, sort of what I'm contemplating on the daily. But I never made those intentional choices or those intentional decisions. I just thought that is what someone did. And so now I'm like, okay, well, I have this, I was forced into it. I wouldn't have chosen it. But and not that you can't do this if you are a parent, but I'm going to make some intentional decisions and really think about what do I want to do. And that's where I'm at now after feeling like I was in a black hole for a long time.
I I really love that you're in that space because that really means that you've done some healing work for yourself, and you've also, by the way, been kind to yourself and been empathetic to the point of just acknowledging what is, knowing that there's things that you can't change there, but focusing on what you can change, and that's rebuilding a new life for you and figuring out what that means and what that looks like. I think that's a big conversation we have in the lost parent community all the time, is that the
Yeah.
life that we there's a big sentence we use in the lost community is that the life we plan for, not just with our child, but with ourselves, is no longer there. It's gone and it's not
Yes.
coming back. But what does this life forward look like for us? And I think that that's a
Yeah, that's
beautiful
exactly
statement
it.
that you said. Um, because a lot of people will stay stuck in grief sometimes, and I was there for many times, so you're not going to find judgment from me. But I will say that getting unstuck is really a matter of figuring out what you want, like Carrie just said, figuring out what this life, how you want to spend your time, what you want to do, what you want to make of things. I think that getting unstuck is not going to happen by flicking a light switch and you're just going to get over it one day. It's not going to happen like that, but it's going to happen through a series of asking yourself those questions about how do I want to create this life and how do I want to spend my time and what do I want to do? And giving yourself that space and that permission to start creating that. So I love your advice there, Carrie. I appreciate you sharing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And again, just to emphasize, like this is me at 46. The me at, 36 would not have even wanted to hear that, quite frankly. So I always like to preface it and just like make say I say that not to minimize, but I say that with full compassion, full love, and doesn't mean that I don't have my moments too, though.
Well, Carrie, I just want to say a big thank you to coming on the show
Yeah.
today and sharing this side of I'm call it childhood, if you will, and parenthood. But it's a one that just it's never really talked about. It's never really
Okay.
discussed, and I think that a lot of ways there's a lot of similarities between what you're going through and the lost community of parents. There's a lot of similarities with that
Yeah.
that I really am glad you came on today to raise awareness about and show people how to navigate grief. That's a big thing I try to help people with is figuring out how to navigate
Hmm.
it. And we all go through it differently. We all have a different journey through grief, but it's through hearing stories like yours, especially about a topic that is borderline taboo and just not discussed and that
Yeah.
many women, including you across the world, hold it in because society doesn't make space for it. I just think that was very beautiful and strong of you to come on today and share this because I do know this episode is going to help many people who listen to it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate those words as well.
Yeah. And as I wrap up the podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions. The first one is
Okay.
if you run into somebody going through grief or who feels stuck in grief, what's one thing you would share with them? And since we're talking about this topic in particular, being childless, not by choice, feel free to tailor it to that.
Yeah, I would say find community and that there's no time frame. No time frame. And it
I,
it it does get better. God, I know that's really cliche, but if you need somebody to hold the hope for you, like no Carrie, that childless lady you heard on the podcast is holding the hope.
Carrie, I appreciate you saying that because what you said a couple minutes ago about my 36-year-old version of myself would not want to hear this right now. I can tell you my 3-year-old or 3 years ago, I would not want to have heard that voice. But
Yep.
I can sit here today and say, yes, it does. It's not going to get easy overnight. I'll say that. But little baby steps, I like to call it 1% a day. Just focus
Yep.
there.
Yes.
And it will get better. So, and Carrie, if people listen to this episode and they want to connect with you, or for that matter, join Saunders Sisterhood, where
Mhm.
can we find you?
Yeah, the best place is YouTube. Sandra Sisterhood is the channel on YouTube or the website, sandrasisterhood.com. I would, and feel free to lurk. Feel free to just lurk if that's where you are right now.
I love that. And for listeners today, I just want to let you guys know I will have Carrie's links to her YouTube and her website in the show notes. When you guys get done listening to this episode, take a look in there and get connected with Carrie. She's got a beautiful story, as you guys have heard, and she's helping people across the globe with her community. And she can also, by the way, I'm sure help connect you guys with people if you're in that same channel of grief. But she's got some great advice, as you guys heard today. So feel free to follow up with her after this. And Carrie, thanks again for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Carrie and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonates with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Carrie's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.